afternoon, everyone. My name is Miranda Clinton, and I am an intern with the North Carolina African American Heritage Commission. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the 7th webinar in the Commission's 9-part webinar series, Growing Our Griots, Strengthening North Carolina's Black Heritage Keepers. During this series, we will explore how our state's Black heritage institutions can execute innovative and sustainable work with the insights of a diversity of cultural workers from across the state and country, like today's guest, who I will introduce shortly. The North Carolina African American Heritage Commission received the American Rescue Plan Humanities Project Support Grant from the North Carolina Humanities Council to execute this series. You can learn more about the North Carolina Humanities Council online at www.nchumanities.org. Funding for ARP has been provided by the National Endowment for the Humanities as part of the American Rescue Plan Act. Today, please drop your questions in the chat where it will be monitored, and we will be answering questions at the end. I want to thank the members of the team who made today possible: Angela Thorpe, Director of the North Carolina African American Heritage Commission, Adrienne Yearday, Associate Director, and a special hello to John Cooper, Bea Pearson, Catalina Lopez, and Winifred Queer, grad student and undergrad students at UNC Greensboro, Wake Forest University, Belmont Abbey College, and Winston-Salem State University, respectively, who are joining us today due to this funding. Today's webinar will be available via recording, and all participants will receive the link. As a note, the next webinar in this series will take place on Friday, August 5th at 1 p.m. We'll be having a conversation with a consultant in Fundraising 101 for African American Heritage Institutions. In the meantime, I am thrilled to welcome our presenter for today, Kimberly Kandros, Manager of Development and Special Projects in the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. Her full bio is available online via the Commission's website. Thank you.
Thank you, Miranda, for that fantastic introduction. Again, my name is Kimberly Kandros. I am the Manager of Development and Special Projects at the North Carolina Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, which is a cabinet-level state agency that oversees about 86 public venues, including the African American Heritage Commission. So I have about 17 years of experience fundraising for the state of North Carolina. I've raised about $35 million during my time with the state for various cultural venues. So I'm excited to share my experiences with you and talk to you about how you can get started if you're looking to raise private funds for your organization. So some of the things I'm going to cover today are how to even get started. If you've got a project that you want funding and you don't even know where to start, how to find those initial funding leads from either individuals or corporations or foundations or government agencies. I'm also going to cover the general elements of a grant proposal when you actually want to approach somebody, and then miscellaneous tips on how to make a proposal stand out from all the others. And then finally, if you get an award, how to actually manage that award. So I've got a ton of stuff to cover in 45 minutes. I'm going to go quickly, but as Miranda mentioned, we will have a time set aside for questions and answers. All right, so if you just bear with me for a second, I'm going to switch over to my PowerPoint and we can begin. Okay, let's see. Whoops. Hang on one second while I try to fix this technical difficulty. Okay, I think I'm back now. Okay. Share screen. Okay, can you all see that? Okay, perfect. Okay, let's get started. So you've got this amazing project that you want funding for, but you don't know how to get started. So there's different sources of funds that you can consider: individual donors, corporate sponsorships, grants, private foundations, and government agencies, including that from the local, state, and federal level. So I want you to not disregard individual donors, because they do make up 76% of philanthropic giving. Okay, so sometimes it's a little overwhelming to ask individuals for money, but don't feel overwhelmed, okay? If you have an established organization with paid members, or if you're part of a student group and you have members in a club, start there. Members are already invested in your organization or your cause, as are volunteers and board members. So that those are going to be your first, your first line of defense there. Get to know them, find out their personal interests. Even if they can't give you financial support, they might be able to connect you with other donors, okay? Or maybe they work for a company that has a matching program, or they know other people who are, just connected to philanthropy. So get to know those people. If you have an urgent need, if you're fundraising, if you're doing a fundraising campaign with like a deadline, let's say, you can always consider crowdfunding as well. So I've used GoFundMe in the past. There are certainly other platforms that you can consider. That's a whole other workshop. So that's all I'll say about crowdfunding. But moving on to corporations, you can start with your local chamber of commerce for prospect research. These are businesses, if they're already joined their local chamber of commerce, they're already invested in their community. They've already paid the fee to join. So they have discretionary funds, and they already know the importance of community. So start there. Look at your local chamber of commerce. The state also has the Department of Commerce, and the Department of Commerce puts out this really fantastic newsletter called Sync. You can go to their website and sign up, and you will get monthly newsletters that talk about all the big major companies that have received tax incentives to move to North Carolina, start businesses there, hire hundreds, thousands of new people. They're investing millions in their business. That is a good prospect primed for a donation. All right. So another strategy for prospect research is finding similar organizations to yours that are hosting similar events or have similar programs. Okay. So you can cyber stalk them, go to their website, find out who their sponsors are. All right. And then another free and very easy way to kind of find new prospects is just reading your newspaper. Look at the business section to find out which companies are expanding, which ones are downsizing. If a company is laying off employees, don't bother with them. They're going to be a bad prospect. They've got financial problems, and they're probably not going to donate to different causes. But if you hear about a company that's relocating to your community and they're creating jobs, that is a good prospect. They want to make a good impact in their community, and they are primed for, soliciting. So, it's also good to kind of target corporations with volunteer programs and employee match programs, because that shows that they are invested already in philanthropy. So foundations are just a little bit harder to find, but not impossible. I actually have a paid subscription to the Foundation Online Directory, which is a database of over like 150,000 private foundations. It is well worth the investment. It costs about $2,000 a year, and it pays for itself. So, if your organization is able to pay for that, I highly recommend it. But there's other ones too. There's lots of subscriptions that you can look at. Also go to your local community foundation. So for example, there's a North Carolina Community Foundation. So you can go there. That's a statewide group, and they give at the local level through affiliate chapters. There's also a Triangle Community Foundation, Foundation for the Carolinas. All of these are donor advised funds. So what that means is, let's say I hit Powerball or whatever, and I have gazillions of dollars to spend, but I don't actually want to create my own foundation. I'm going to invest my money in this local community foundation. I'm going to let that organization do the work. I might say, my interest is, maybe like disease research. And so I will let that community foundation know my giving parameters, and they manage it. Okay. So contact them, get to know that program officer, let them know about your organization or the project for which you're seeking funding, and see if there's a match there. And then the final thing I want to talk about is government grants. So government grants are free to access. Do not pay anybody any money to find out government grants, because that's not necessary. The federal government has this great web portal called grants.gov. You sign up. Again, it's free. You put in an email, you create an account, email, password, and you are able to do targeted searches for federal grants. Okay, you can put a keyword, the agency you're looking at. Unfortunately, the state of North Carolina does not have a similar portal that you can search at, but you're going to want to look for the agency that's a topical match to your organization. So if you're doing anything related to health and human services, look at the Department of Health and Human Services website, see what kind of grant opportunities that they're offering. Okay, so I've talked about all the free sources, but you're also going to want to kind of get plugged into the philanthropy industry. And so I also highly recommend getting on newsletter distribution lists and listservs. Okay, so this is a list of free sources. You can look at these things and just kind of get a pulse, get a feeling of what's going on. These organizations sometimes give free webinars, they give free training, they give free resources. Sometimes they have booklets that you can download, and a lot of news, a lot of updates. So if there is a big major foundation that's giving a lot of grants out, you'll know about it. So I highly suggest looking at these sources and getting on their newsletter list. So now when you're searching for funding for your project, you're going to want to find as many sources as possible. So go ahead, find some individual prospects, some foundations, some corporations, and some government agencies. You're going to want to find as many sources as possible from as many sectors as possible. Just because you apply to a grant does not mean you're going to get the award. Okay, so unfortunately, some federal funding agencies have a rejection rate as high as 95%. So diversify. All right, so you've created a diverse list of prospects from different sources. So how do you go about actually writing a grant? So one thing I really want to impress upon you is that every grant proposal is different. Different agencies are going to require different components within their narrative, but almost always an organization is going to want to know the basics. Who's asking for the money? What's the problem? Why do you need the money? How much money is going to fix your problem? How much money do you need? When do you expect to finish your project? So just the basics, explain everything that you can. Keeping in mind that almost every proposal has a page limitation, so you have to be succinct about it as well. The first thing that you should cover in your proposal narrative is who you are. Introduce your organization just as you would introduce yourself when you meet a new person. Proposals are reviewed by agency staff and then sent to a review panel of industry experts. So these folks may or may not know who you are. This is your moment to shine. Don't be shy about bragging. List all of your achievements and growth. Quantify whenever possible. So what do I mean by that? If you're keeping attendance statistics, show that. If you're able to say that your attendance has grown, I don't know, say 10% each year for the past 5 years, show that. The same with your program. If your program has grown, or if you have a wait list of people trying to get in, show that. Also include your mission statement. And then if you have a separate vision statement, include that as well. List any strategic goals that your organization has and describe anything that makes you special. All right. So here's an example. This is actually an excerpt that taken from one of the grants that I've written. I use the standard boilerplate information in almost all my proposals. I'm not going to go read the screen, but you can. When you read it, you'll see that it includes the name and location of my organization, what we cover, and how many people we serve. So typically in the next paragraph, which I did not include on the screen because I didn't want to put you all to sleep, I would include our mission statement, keeping in mind that my project should always be mission driven. So what do I mean by mission driven? If you're an arts organization, don't write a proposal seeking to help homeless dogs and cats, although we all love homeless dogs and cats. But if that's not what your organization does, don't stray from your mission. So your mission statement, your vision statement, and your organizational goals should always support your project goals. All right, so you've introduced yourself. Now this is the part that I like to say, what the heck is your problem, right? So the need statement is where you tell people what the problem is and why should they care. So you always want to assume that your reviewers are skeptical and maybe even a little grumpy and rolling their eyes at you. Okay, so this is your part where you have to sell your program. Remember that foundations exist to give away money, but At the same time, a board of trustees or the review panel or whoever it is that's looking at your proposal, they're safeguarding either tax dollars or private investments to ensure that this money is being well spent. Use your need statement to be compelling. So it's going to be especially effective if you have facts or statistics or research that has a wow factor or a shock value. Your opening paragraph should compel the reader to keep reading, and your need statement should convey some sort of a sense of urgency. Like, if you don't do this now, this is what's going to happen. Don't be afraid to use dramatic or colorful language. I'm going to apologize for this next screen. It's very text heavy, but I want you to go ahead and read it. This was a grant that I wrote for the Charlotte Hawkins Brown State Historic Site, which was the site of the Palmer Memorial Institute, which was a school for African-American and Black children during the Jim Crow era and up to the Civil Rights era. Now, the school actually burned down in 1971 and was abandoned for a long time before the state came in and purchased it as a state historic site to interpret African-American history. All right, so go ahead and read it. After 50 years of neglect, the proud legacy of the tea house is in danger of fading away from the civil rights story. The inside of the structure is derelict and even unsafe to enter. Debris, rusted appliances, fallen beams, and broken floorboards populate the once bustling heart of the campus. Each year, deterioration progresses. Renovation of the tea house will safeguard this legacy from future damage, protecting it for generations to come. At the same time, alumni from the Palmer Memorial Institute are now aging out. The school shut its doors in 1971, meaning its youngest class to graduate are now in their late 60s. There is an urgency to restore the site sooner rather than later so that surviving alumni may share their memories of the tea house with architects and designers to ensure the building is accurately repaired. Renovation of the tea house will safeguard this property from future damage, protecting it for generations to come, and enabling visitors to experience what was once the location of a unique educational opportunity. That is the teaching of Black entrepreneurship and business in the Jim Crow era of the South. Okay, now that paints a dire picture. The threat is that this decaying building is going to fade away from the civil rights story, which we don't want that to happen. We even have a sense of urgency, almost kind of like implying that the alumni are dying, which is, the urgency that we need. We want to involve alumni in the planning of this. And it's also inspirational. If you do this, we're going to safeguard this property and protect the legacy, okay? And just to let you know, this grant brought in about $500,000 to restore the tea house. So this was a funded proposal. All right, so here's another example. I am not going to read through this, but I just kind of want you to take a look at it. It's another example of painting a dire picture. In this case, if the grant is not funded, North Carolina will lose a piece of its cultural heritage and history. All right, so you can read that. It's basically we're painting a dire picture to let the agency and reviewers know what's at stake if they don't fund our proposal. All right. So you've described who you are and what your problem is. Next is your goal. Your goal is what you want to do to fix the problem that you just described. And then your objectives are what your plan is that's going to hold you accountable. Remember that there's money involved. And when a proposal asks for goals and objectives, they really want a step-by-step roadmap to know exactly how you plan to manage your project so that you don't squander their investment, okay? So remember, a goal without a plan or a goal without objectives is just a wish, all right? So I'm going to kind of go over what the differences are with you. We all, well, most of us anyway, we all kind of say, oh, I want to lose weight, I want to lose weight. But without that objective, it's just a wish, which is why many of us don't go ahead and lose the weight, right? So in this example, okay, the goal is that you want to lose weight. That's the end result. Your objective is how you're going to do it. Okay, now many of you have heard the term SMART objectives. SMART is an objective, SMART is an acronym that stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound, okay? So my goal is to lose weight. My objective is losing 5 pounds of weight and 1 inch off my waist in 1 month. Okay, that's very specific, and it's measurable, 5 pounds, 1 inch, right? It's achievable and realistic. I'm not saying I want to lose 40 pounds in a month. I just want to lose 5 pounds. That's only 1.25 pounds a week, right? So that's totally doable. It's also time bound. Okay, I'm giving myself 1 month to do it. Now, all proposals are going to ask that you identify goals and objectives. Some of them will also ask you to identify outcomes and outputs. So outcomes are going to be your expected results, what's going to happen. So with the weight loss example, right, the outcomes are going to be weight loss. Your clothes fit better. You have more energy. Maybe there's some health metrics that are going to improve. Your outputs are going to be how you're actually going to do it. What activity are you going to do to make it happy? So with my example, you know, there's going to be some caloric limitation. I'm going to limit my calories. I'm going to do exercise, those kind of things. Now, some proposals also require you to do evaluation. If you're writing a big proposal, like a $250,000 proposal, you might have the budget to hire an external evaluator to come in and assess your project. It does not have to be that formal. You can actually do something free and in-house. You can hand out surveys after an event or after a program. You can do focus groups. You can do a lot of things that are free and in-house, but sometimes they will require some sort of evaluation. Okay, so in this case, maybe the evaluation is a good doctor's report. You know, your blood pressure's gone down, and you know, your clothes are fitting better. It's the evaluation is basically holding you accountable so that you're not just saying you did something, but there's actually proof that you did it. It's also important to include outcomes that you might not have anticipated, such as more confidence. You know, you didn't report increased confidence in your objectives, but maybe that is a result. So that's something you want to keep in mind as well. All right, so creating a budget is what gives people anxiety, but it really shouldn't. A budget is an important part of the grant proposal process. This is your opportunity to ask for all the bells and whistles you need to make your project great, but without being ridiculous. So once you ask for an amount, you can't go back and ask for more. So if you're asking for a certain amount and then you realize, oh my gosh, you know, I got the award, but I forgot to include that, it's too late. You can't go back and ask them for more money. So as you're developing your budget, be sure to think of everything. If you ask for too much, that's not a problem because you can always request an amendment and use it on other things, or just not draw that money down, or maybe return it if they give you the money up front. So it's better to over budget than under budget, okay? It's also helpful to expect the unexpected and anticipate all hidden costs. The other thing to remember is including overhead for your support group. Okay, so if you're not familiar with the term overhead or indirect costs are the rate you would charge to cover administrative expenses or your ongoing expenses of your organization. So indirect costs are expenses that your organization incurs regardless of whether or not your project is running. So examples would include paying the rent on your building, paying the electric bill, paying the salaries of your administrative staff, that kind of stuff. And then your direct costs are going to be the expenses that are incurred as a direct result of your project. All right. So just to give you an example, the department has an indirect cost of 10%. So if I have a project and I'm asking for $100,000, I can actually ask for $110,000 to cover my organization's indirect costs. Okay. So don't be afraid to include that. If you forget to include that, you're leaving money off the table. Another element of your budget is going to possibly include matching funds. So sometimes when you're applying for funds, a granting agency wants to see a match, okay? So what that means is if you're asking for 100,000, again, sometimes an agency will want a one-to-one match. That means you need to show $100,000 in other funds. It could be in other grant funds that you've gotten, or it can be in kind, okay? So I don't want the matching fund requirement to scare you off. The vast majority of granting agencies allow you to use the value of your time and labor, the use of your facilities and supplies. So you don't always have to have a cash match. All right, so to give you another example, I'm going back to 100,000. If you ask for 100,000 and you need to show a one-to-one match, You can include a percentage, not the entire amount, but a percentage of staff salary, plus a proportionate amount of your benefits. So if my salary is $100,000, and I always use 100,000 because I'm terrible in math and that's just an easy number to use. If my salary is $100,000, I'm not going to include all of that because that would imply I'm spending 100% of my time on a grant, right? So I'm only going to say maybe 15% of my time is being spent on the grant. So that would be $15,000, the value of my time, right? Plus your benefits. So the state of North Carolina pays for your health benefits. It pays for Social Security taxes, unemployment taxes, retirement, all the value of all the benefits that your employer provides can be included in the match. So that's approximately 35%, right? So my 15,000 in in-kind salary plus 35% of that would be about 5,250. You add those two amounts together, you get 20,000, okay, for 1 year. Let's say my project is a 2-year project. That's over $40,000 of in-kind, okay? So I don't want the matching to scare you off. You can also use the value of facilities, the value of your equipment, and certainly if you have money from private sources, use that as well, which is why it's important to diversify your funding prospects. All right. Now, your budget justification is where you have to explain your costs and how you arrived at the total ask amount. Don't inflate cost. Even though I told you to ask for all the bells and whistles, don't inflate and exaggerate to the point of being crazy, okay? So this is where you show that you're not making up lies, and you have to show that your costs are reasonable and well thought out. If you're hiring a part-time administrative assistant for $250,000, that's just, the reviewers are going to say that's a little excessive and ridiculous. And so your proposal will not score competitively, all right? So when you're doing your budget justification, you're going to have to show how you arrived at those costs. And so you're going to have to document that. All right, so now if you're doing travel, for example, the U.S. Department of State on their website will list the per diem rate, which means, the cost of meals, the cost of hotel, different costs related to travel. They will show you what the federal approved rate is on the state, on their website. Okay, now you can also do this on the state level. Okay, the state of North Carolina has a website. If you're traveling to other states, you can go to the GSA website and look up approved per diems for other states. Okay, so you can do that as well. If you are flying or you need hotel or car rental, use Expedia or any other travel site to kind of find out what the going rate is for different things. Okay, now if you want to find out the value of your facilities, again, for your match, or maybe, for whatever reason, I'm using this example from the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. To rent their exhibit or their theater, it costs, they have a price, they have a price chart. That would be the fair market value. So you can actually use this either for your cost share, or if you're renting someone else's facility and you actually have to pay cash for that, show how you're arriving at these costs. And again, if you're trying to just buy supplies, you're going to want to show how you're getting those quotes. Okay, so document your costs, don't make things up, don't inflate, but ask for everything that you need. All right, another section that's commonly included in grant proposals is sustainability. This means, how are you going to keep the program alive when your funds run out? Maybe your grant funds are a one-time expense, like an exhibit. So if that's the case, you can state so. But if this is an ongoing program, like let's say a summer camp for children that you want to do every year, you're going to have to explain what's going to happen after the project period ends. So again, this is another good reason to diversify your list of prospects and have different sources lined up. Another section that you're going to need to include, and this is the final element that I'm going to go through, is a timeline. Okay. So again, every grant is different. Some proposals are only 12 months long. Others can be up to 5 years. This can be a narrative explanation or a visual or bulleted list to help reviewers kind of understand the sequence of events and when those outputs can be expected. The timeline is also going to force you to think about whether you have allocated enough time and enough staff to complete everything that you said. If you're taking too much on, the reviewers are going to see that and not fund your project. So be realistic. You're going to want to show every step of the process, beginning with the award date and every deliverable mentioned in your goals and objectives. Those should be accounted for in your timeline. So it's a good practice to kind of cross-check your goals and objectives with your timeline. You can also cross-check these sections with your budget and your budget justification to make sure you have included enough funds for everything. All right. So I'm going to share with you another example. This is more of a visual timeline. It certainly doesn't have to be done this way. Again, it could be done in a narrative format. But here's like a color coordinated, list of things when it's going to happen. And this was a grant done for the Institute of Museum and Library Services. So those are the most common elements of a grant proposal, but you need to remember that no two grant proposals are ever the same, and some agencies are going to be asking for some pretty specific information. When you're applying for funds, it's going to be real important to know the mission of the organization to which you're applying. Okay, what's important to them? What are the goals and objectives of the grant program? Use the same language that the granting agency uses. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of some proposals that that we're working on now. So about 2 or 3 weeks ago, we actually wrote a proposal for Bentonville battlefield, okay? And it was written to the Open Source Institute, which is an agency that is concerned about climate change, fighting climate change, okay? So the project idea was to restore the landscape, okay? So for the Open Source Institute, because they're interested in climate change, we wrote about the importance of converting agricultural land back to a forest, and the benefits of carbon storage, and how forests will help with forest fires and air quality and flooding and all of this stuff, okay? 2 weeks later, we began a different proposal for the same exact project, but it was written to the National Park Institute, the National Park Service, which doesn't care a thing about climate change, but they care about preserving history. So all of a sudden, the same exact project had very, very different language. And we're talking about restoring the battlefield to day of conditions and getting rid of things that weren't on the battlefield 150 years ago. Okay, so same project, very different language. Another tip is to call the program officer to pitch your idea and get feedback. A lot of programs, especially at the federal level, offer webinars. So participate in them, sign up, participate, listen in, see what's important for that program. Look at the website and see if past proposals are posted. And if they are, read them, see what a successful proposal looks like. Even reach out to past awardees to see if they would be willing to share some tips with you. So I wanted to share just some miscellaneous tips. When you're writing your proposal, keep in mind that you're competing against sometimes hundreds of different applicants. And it's somebody's job at these agencies to sort through them all. So simple formatting tricks are going to make your proposal easier on the eye. Use headings, okay, for each section. When you're reading the instructions for the proposal, kind of use the same headings that they use. This way a reviewer can say, well, did they answer this question? And they go back and they say, oh yeah, here's the question and here's the answer. Use bullet points, narratives, charts, okay? Try to just make it as easy on the eye as possible, because some narratives can be as much as 15 to 20 pages long, okay? Also, the language that you use the present tense. It's better to say something like, this program provides, or this program will provide, better than saying this program would provide. It's just easier to read, and it's also like a little psychological tip, like it's already funded. This program provides, it's already a done deal. You kind of put it in their head that way, and it's just, studies have shown it's actually more effective. All right, so here is an example. I don't expect you to read all this. This is an example of a page, and you'll see that there's bold headings for each thing. And then I also use a chart to kind of cram information in there. Okay, I cram my goals, my objectives, my evaluation. you have so many pages to get a lot of information. So if you're looking at a page limitation, I do recommend charts whenever possible. Again, headings, present tense language, okay? Miscellaneous add-ons. All right, so some proposals will want you to include all sorts of things, including letters of support. Okay, so what I do and what I highly recommend you do when you're writing your proposals, if a letter of support is requested from a partner, write the letter yourself, write a sample letter, and then send it to that person. Everybody's so busy and everybody's wearing so many different hats. And so it's a lot of work to ask somebody to read your proposal and then write a letter from scratch. But if you do it for them, you're more likely to get something back in a timely manner, okay? If you have written estimates from contractors, include that, okay? If you have brochures, pictures, past reports, anything like that, include that as an attachment because that is going to kind of help your proposal. Again, remember that you have a page limitation. You might only be able to have 10 pages of written stuff, but you can include attachments and that will add more information, okay? So you've done your grant proposal. You've written everything. All right. Have people review it. The more eyes that are on your proposal, the better. Okay. Give it to someone else to review. Again, if you're writing a 15-page proposal, your brain is going to turn to mush and you're not going to see typos. You're not going to see formatting mistakes. The more pairs of eyes that read a proposal, the better your end product will be. Also, if you're giving it to different people with different expertise, they are going to have suggestions that you didn't even think of, okay? So it's important to involve the staff who's actually going to be implementing the grant involved in the writing process to ensure what you're describing is doable and that you're using the right terminology, especially if what you're doing is in any way technical. All right, so you've got the grant. You wrote the grant, you submitted the grant, you've actually got it awarded. So now what? One of the first things that you need to do is thank your donor. Generally, I thank my donor 7 times, all right? So I start with a phone call, an email, I write a formal thank you letter, we do a press release, maybe a shout out on social media. You can thank them throughout the project when you're updating them with reports. And then, a thank you after the program as well, all right? When you're thanking your donor, do not ask them for more money in the thank you letter. That's just tacky. Just thank them. That's it. All right. Once you get the award, it's important to let all the staff know who's involved. So organize a planning meeting with your staff to ensure that everyone knows their roles, everyone knows the rules of the grant, everyone is aware of the reporting deadlines, the obligations, everything. So you're going to want to provide all your team members with a copy of the grant, as well as the budget and the contract, if you have the contract, all right? A good idea is also to organize check-in meetings on a monthly, quarterly, or annual basis, depending on the frequency of your reporting schedule. Having these regular meetings are going to help ensure that your project stays on track, all right? So I find it extremely helpful to create a schedule of reports. I use the task feature in Outlook, but you can also use your calendar. If you're writing a lot of grants, writing and receiving a lot of grants, and you have a big portfolio, it's going to be hard to keep track of everything unless you keep a schedule. So that is very, very important that you maintain compliance. A lot of times you are going to want to go back to the same funding sources. And if you are in default of a grant, if you're not doing a good job managing your award, guess what? They're not going to give you another grant. So compliance is extremely important, which brings me to reporting. So as your program is being implemented, track down things that are happening, such as unexpected outcomes, all right? Take pictures, call your program officer if anything unusual happens that requires a change, all right? So just to give you an example, I did a grant for the North Carolina Transportation Museum to preserve one of their items and collections. So we got the grant, it was a significant amount, and everything was going fine until the pandemic hit and shut everything down. Okay, so everything got thrown off track. Now, during the pandemic, like half their staff quit. So we had all these staff named in the project and like a ton of them quit. So that threw it off. Then it was discovered that there was like asbestos in the walls of the thing that we were trying to preserve. So that threw everything off on track. If that wasn't bad enough, there was an arsonist, a homeless man who started setting things on fire in the town and actually damaged one of the items at the Transportation Museum. So, I mean, everything that could go wrong did go wrong, but I kept working with the program officer. I let our person know at the granting agency what was happening. I kept updating them as things were happening. And I asked for an extension. And because I was so open and forthcoming with the program officer, we had a good working relationship. An extension was granted, no worries. Okay, so have that rapport with your program officer and let them know if anything is happening that might be throwing your project off. So at the start of your program, issue a press release to let the media know. You're going to want to post regularly on social media to get the word out. Funders like to get their name out in the community, and it's another way to thank them. If it's appropriate, hold a public event such as an unveiling, a festival, an open house, anything like that. So when you build awareness of a project, you actually attract additional donors as well as additional participants. All right, so you wrote the grant, you submitted the grant, you got it funded, your staff is implementing, you're on top of reporting. Now you got to do it all over again. So, I mean, you shouldn't actually wait until everything is over. You should always be looking to reapply. It's just like an ongoing cycle, okay? If you write a grant and you get it, think about reapplying for the next year. If you don't receive a grant, look at the reviews, okay, to strengthen your proposal and reapply the next year. If you don't get written feedback, call up the program officer and ask why you didn't get funded. Ask for a debriefing. And maybe it's the wrong match, or maybe there was something missing from your proposal that you can correct in the next cycle, okay? So always look for other funding. You know, this is an ongoing process, and always update your prospect list because you never want your funding to run out. All right, so I think that is just about 45 minutes. Does anybody have any questions? I see there are some things in the chat there. Let's see. Oh gosh.
Yes, thank you, Kimberly, once again for that presentation. It was very informative. Yes. And so we will open the floor now to questions. If anyone has a question, and you can drop it in the chat. Kimberly, I do have a question that I would like to know.
Sure.
Can you speak more to the situation of defaulting, and if there's any future possibility of receiving grants if you have been found in default?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you really royally mess up a grant, there's two ways that go about it. Stuff happens, and program officers know that their mission is not to, you know, be hard on their grantees. They work with the grantees, right? And so if something happens that really throws your project off the rails, talk to the program officer. Let them know, well, what can I do to fix this? Now, if it's willful neglect, if you just like take the money and run to a tropical island somewhere, then there are serious consequences for that. And yes, you will never be asked, you will never be given granting money again. But, you know, generally that's not what happens. Generally what happens is the unforeseen happens, like a global pandemic and supply chain shortages that just mess everything up. Talk to your program officer, work with them. They will find a solution. And you can ask for an extension. You can do something that will result in the desired outcomes.
Thank you. We do have a question in the chat from Chris. They ask, are grants typically for business? What if I have an individual project?
Right. So most grants are only open to organizations that have a 501c3 or are a government organization. There are some opportunities that are available to private businesses, private for-profit businesses, but those are very few and far between. So if you're looking to fund a business, the Small Business Administration is a great source for that. And they do have some, they have grants and they have loans and they have different programs. But again, the process is the same. Just call somebody up there, try to get a hold of a human, participate in their webinars. They have a lot of resources for small businesses.
Thank you. Another question, can you speak to more on sustainability and how a company can actually use grants to sustain their entire business?
Yeah. So, again, you're going to want to just always look for a lot of different sources. Don't rely on one source. If you have one main funder, you might be able to go back to them for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, but eventually they're going to say like, we keep funding you and we want to see that you have other sources. So a couple of tricks are do something new and exciting each year. If you're doing, I'm just making stuff up now. Let's say you have a nonprofit that teaches girls ballet, open it up to boys. Maybe the next year you're going to teach ballet and tap. Maybe you're going to then expand and do something where the girls and boys go to nursing homes and entertain the elderly, do something new each year that really expands the scope. So that's a way to keep ongoing funders interested in continuing to invest in that program. But again, just try to find new sources, always find new sources. And that is also why it's important to document success. People want a return on investment. And I don't necessarily mean I don't mean profit. I mean, is it worthwhile? Are you reaching, are you impacting the intended audience? Are you making a difference? So it's important to have quantitative as well as qualitative measures to show that this is a worthwhile program that you're doing and it's worthy of investment.
I want to thank Kimberly once again for that informative presentation. Thank you all for joining.